We are on the bottom of 63a1. Okay, so we're still going to be talking about kachim, but this is going to be, I think, an easier Gemara. So the Mishnah spoke about the fact that when you shecht the Karban Pesach, when you slaughter the Karban Pesach, you cannot own chametz. Okay, you cannot own chametz. That if you do own chametz, you're in violation of a significant of a prohibition. So Amram Shimon Lakish, Rav Shimon Lakish says, La'olam Eino Chayav. When the Mishnah said that you are going to be liable for owning chametz, that is only when you shecht your Karban Pesach. La'olam Eino Chayav Achei Chametz l'shochet or l'zorek. Okay, the chametz is going to belong either to the one who slaughters the offering, okay, or the one who throws its blood. Next page. Or it's the one of the members of the group. Okay, so far so good. In other words, he's saying this Mishnah, which said they're going to be liable when you own chametz and you go and do the Karban Pesach, there's a couple of different people who are going to be possible triggers for this prohibition. One is the person who slaughters the Karban Pesach. That's not usually the owner. You have a sheichet, you have a bunch of slaughterers who are sitting there in the courtyard on Erev Pesach slaughtering. If that guy owns chametz, then he is in violation of a prohibition. And then you have the Kohanim, or sprinkling the blood. If that Kohen who sprinkles the blood owns chametz, he's going to be chayav. And then lastly, any member of the group who this lamb belongs to, right? In other words, this lamb belongs to, our chabura, our group of people who are going to eat the Karban Pesach together. If one of us owns chametz, also you're going to be liable for this. But then he adds, v'achiyeh imo ba'azara. And the chametz has to be with you in the courtyard itself, right? If you have chametz in your house, you're not going to be in violation. It's only if you have the chametz in your back pocket, you have like a cookie, that you're saying that's the only case you're chayav. We'll see why in a moment. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Afapish Enimo Bazara, even if the chametz is not with you in the courtyard, you are still going to be liable. Okay, so we have this debate when there is a violation of owning chametz when you when you have the Karban Pesach, and so you can have chametz when you get to the slaughtering of the Karban Pesach, and that prohibition is going to be in violation according to Rish Lakish only if you have the chametz with you in the courtyard, and according to Rav Yochanan, even if it's not with you in the courtyard. Okay, and other Gemara is going to try to understand what in the world, what is the basis of the machlokas. 63b1, second column. What are they arguing about? Ilema be'al b'samach kemifligi. The pasuk says, "You shall not slaughter the Pesach over chametz." Don't slaughter your Karban Pesach over chametz. So what does the word over mean? Al. What does it mean? Maybe that's what they're arguing about. Rav Shimon Lakish savar al b'samach. Rav Shimon Lakish says when it says don't slaughter the Pesach over chametz, it means near chametz. Rabbi Yochanan savar lo b'inam al b'samach. Okay, Rabbi Yochanan says no, you do not need. The word over does not mean near. Okay, so maybe that's what they're arguing about. The word al, when it says over, doesn't mean near. Rish Lakish says yes, and therefore, unless you have the chametz with you in the azar, in the courtyard, unless you have it with you, you're not going to be in violation. And Rabbi Yochanan says, no, the word al does not mean near you, and therefore, even if you have chametz at home, wherever home is, you're going to be chayav. The Gemara says that can't be what they're arguing about. Why? Because they already debated this exact point elsewhere, and therefore, presumably, they're not going to state the same debate twice. Where's the elsewhere? It's not was taught in the Mishnah about a similar halacha, and that is the following. When you bring a karban toda, okay, you bring a karban toda. Karban toda is an animal that you slaughter for the sake of Thanksgiving. You're very grateful. You also have bread that is brought with it. We spoke about this bread before. You have a ton of loaves of bread. Why? That way you invite so many people to share with you the simcha. That's the original source for having a suda soda. When something good happens to you, you want to invite people. You make a kiddush. You have a event at your house. The point is that you want to spread the good word about what happened to you. So these breads. The pasuk says Hikriv al zevach hatoda chalos matos. It says when you bring the offering, it should be al. The pasuk is al zevach hatoda chalos matos. That on the offering there should be chalos matos. It should be bread, but it uses that same word al. That it should be on top of it. So the Mishnah says Hashochei toda lifnim v'lachma chutz lachoma. Let's say a person slaughters the karban toda inside where they're supposed to slaughter it, but the bread is outside of the courtyard. Lo kadash alechem. Okay, it says outside. Sorry, and the bread is outside. That's all it says, outside. Then the bread is not consecrated. Mai chutz lechoma. But when the Mishnah says it's outside, what does it mean outside? Rabbi Yochanan Amar chutz lechomas beis pagi. Rabbi Yochanan says it means outside the walls of beis pagi. What is beis pagi? In modern times, it's called Bethpage. Bethpage. It's a very, if you're a Christian, you know what that is. Thank God you don't. The Christians, it's a pilgrimage site. It's where Jesus apparently began his march into Jerusalem or something like that. Fine. Bottom line is Bethpage. It's really the plate. It's called Pagi is figs. It's fig. So basically, whatever, it's a place outside Yerushalayim. You can look it up. Beis Pagi, it's a place outside Yerushalayim. So according to Rav Yochanan, when it says outside, it meant like really far away. Not, I mean, it doesn't mean like right outside the courtyard. It means like at the edge of Yerushalayim. But if it's right outside the walls of the courtyard, meaning it's in the rova, whatever, then that's fine. And al does not mean it has to be right next to it. However, if it's outside the walls of the courtyard, it's not sanctified. Because al has to be right there. The word al means has to be right there. So the Gemara is questioning. The Gemara is saying, don't tell me that when Rav Yochanan and Rish Lakish argue about chametz, what they're arguing about is the meaning of al. Does al mean right next to it or not? Because if that's the case, and that's why Rish Lakish said you have to have the chametz with you in your back pocket, but if it's outside, it's not going to be, you're not going to be in violation because, and the reason is based on the word al. Does al mean right there? And Rish Lakish says, yes, al means right there, but we already saw that he says al means right there. Regarding the Karban Toda, there'd be no reason to say the same point about Pesach, right? Okay, and therefore the Gemara says that can't be what they're arguing about. Rather, it must be they're arguing about the following. Maybe they're arguing about warning in a situation of doubt. Okay, what does that mean? Normally, to be in violation of a prohibition, you have to be warned, right? It's worth noting that for you to be really get punished in the Torah in this world is extremely, extremely unlikely in general, right? When we think about a person's violation of Shabbos, right? So what's the punishment for a person for deliberately violating Shabbos? Misa, right? But the only way a person would actually get executed is if two people walk over to the person and say, "Hey, Mister, what you're about to do is one of the 39 prohibitions. If you do it, we're going to go to the courts and testify. They're going to go ahead and kill you. Go ahead." Right? And if they do it, then the likelihood of that happening is obviously very slim. Okay, that's an aside point. The main point is that you need to have hasra, you need to have warning. The question is there a concept of warning in a situation of doubt? So let's plug it into our case of the Karban Pesach. A man standing there about to slaughter his Karban Pesach, and two people walk over to him and say, "Hey, I saw outside your house there was a delivery of cookies, right? And I think you have chametz by your house. Okay? Therefore, don't slaughter this Karban Pesach because you have cookies by your house." Now, we're standing in the Azara. His house is in Ramot, right? Do we know that there's chametz there anymore? Who knows? Maybe he sold it. Maybe it got eaten. Maybe the wind blew away. Maybe the Amazon stealer guy took the cookies. Who knows? We have no idea. We don't see the chametz in front of us, right? So we have no idea for sure that it's there. Possibly it's there, and therefore that's called hasras safek, right? So maybe what the argument is as follows. Rish Lakish says hasras safek, a doubtful or uncertain hasra warning, is not good, and therefore unless the guy has the chametz on him, he's holding the cookie while he's slaughtering the thing, they say, okay, I see your chametz, you can't do this, that's a good warning. But if it's sitting at home, Rish Lakish would say it doesn't work because that's hasras safek. I'm warning someone about something I do not know definitively. Whereas Rav Yochanan says no, hasras safek is going to be a good hasra, and that's what Rav Yochanan says. Even if the chametz is not with you in the azara in the courtyard, it would still be a good hasra. The Gemara says maybe that's what they're arguing about. The Gemara says no. 63b2 v'hanami hapligi ba'achad. They disagreed about this one time as well. The Itmar is taught elsewhere. Shavua sha'ochel kikar zohayom. If a person swears an oath that I will eat this loaf today. Okay, a person makes a shvua, an oath, that I'm going to eat a piece of bread. And then the day passes, and the person did not eat the loaf. Rabbi Yochanan and Shimon Lakish says that if the person, normally if you violate an oath, you get malchus. But in this case, you don't get lashes. The question is, they disagree why. Okay? Rabbi Yochanan says the reason you don't get lashes in this case is there's a prohibition that does not involve an action over here. We have a general rule that, according to the debated rule, Rabbi Yochanan says that anytime you're in violation of something which you violate passively without doing something, you don't get malchus. Now in this case, the guy took an oath not to eat bread. Right? To eat bread. I'm going to eat bread. Right? How do they, if the person would be violating this, how do you violate I swear I'm going to eat bread. So how would I violate that? By not eating bread. That's passive. That's a lav she'ein bo ma'isa. I'm not doing anything, right? The only way to violate this is by not eating bread, by not doing an action. That's a lav she'ein bo ma'isa. Says Rabbi Yochanan, lav she'ein bo ma'isa, ein lo ken alav. You would not get malchus for this because at the end of the day, you didn't do anything. Granted, you broke your shvua, but you broke the shvua without any action. Okay, aval hasra safek shma hasra. But he says, but you would still be able to give hasra in this case. What is he referring to? What he means like this. How do you warn a person, right? In order for hasra to be good, warning to be good, it has to be done right before the action, right? Or the inaction. So over here, when would I'd have to warn you, you have to be eating this bread. But at what moment am I supposed to be giving you that warning, right? The point is, like, I have to warn you when you're not eating it, right? There's like the whole day, there's no proper time to go ahead and do so. But Rabbi Yochanan says, that's fine. That issue is not an issue. If I say, you must be eating the bread, hey, you made a shvur, you're going to eat this bread, you must be eating this bread, that is, even though there's no definitive moment where you're going to demonstrate that you're not eating the bread, that's still going to, even though there's like it's a hasra, it's a warning, which doesn't have a definitive relationship to a particular moment, that's still going to be good hasra. So Rabbi Yochanan says the reason you don't get malchus is not because of a faulty hasra, a questionable hasra, it's because the only way to violate this prohibition is by inaction, and inaction never translates into malchus. Okay? Rav Shimon Lakish Amar Eina Lok. Rav Shimon Lakish also says you don't get malchus, but for a different reason. Mishum Nahavilei Hasra Safik, because again, it's a questionable warning. Hasra Safik Lo Shmasra, and a questionable warning is not considered a valid warning. Amalav Shimon Maisa Lokan Alav. Rav Lakish holds that you would get lashes even though there's no action involved. Bottom line is, what do you see? You see that Rav Yochanan and Rav Lakish already argued about this question about Hasra Safik, about a questionable warning. Rav Lakish says a questionable warning is not valid. Okay, and therefore we would, and Rav Yochanan says it is valid, and therefore once we have this discussion, we would already know when it comes to the chametz to be the same thing. That Reish Lakish would say, unless you have the chametz with you, it's a questionable warning. Okay, and we know what he holds by that. And Rav Yochanan, we already know that he holds that even if it's a questionable warning, it's a valid warning, and therefore there's no need for them to mention it again by our case of the chametz owned by the individual who's slaughtering the Karban Pesach. Bottom line is Gemara saying again, this can't be the reason, because if it is, we already know they argue about this. The Gemara goes back to the first reason. Amri, they said, really, they're arguing about that question of, does the word over mean near? Okay, and again, when the Gemara said, initially when we tried to suggest that, we said we already know this from the Karban Toda, where the Karban Toda, the Torah says that it has to be slaughtered on the bread, and we saw Reish Lakish says the bread has to be right there in the courtyard, and Rav Yochanan says even if it's not in the courtyard, it's still considered there, right? So the Gemara says we already had this discussion. The Gemara is going to point out that you can't infer one from the other. Why? Both. Had they only argued like in our mission regarding chametz, Havamina would have said, in our case of chametz, you don't need it to be near. Again, according to Rav Yochanan, Rav Yochanan says, again, let's go back to our brisa, our Mishnah that the Rav Yochanan is talking about. There's a prohibition to own chametz when you slaughter. Rav Shlakish says it has to be with you. Rav Yochanan says it does not have to be with you. So maybe Rav Yochanan only says this thing, it doesn't have to be with you when it comes to chametz. Why? Because to own chametz is already an isser. There's already a prohibition of owning chametz once midday of Pesach comes around. There's an additional prohibition of slaughtering while you own chametz. Right? Those are two prohibitions. But the point is, there's already a chametz. There's already an isser that takes place simply by owning chametz. So ba'hu hu dekamar of Yochanan Tlabinan al Basamach. Maybe here by chametz he says over does not need to be near because mishum isserhu. There's already a prohibition of chametz. V'chol heicha isay. Wherever it is, then you're going to be in violation. Mikdash lechem. But regarding sanctifying the bread of the Torah offering, lo kadosh el b'fnim. Maybe it would only be sanctified when it's near the animal sacrifice. Okay, Ema moda later of Shimon Lakish to be in al basamach. There, when it comes to sanctifying the bread, maybe he would agree that the word al there. It's logical to say that the word al by the Karban Toda and its bread there, it has to be there. Why? Di isay gavai kaddish ilo lo kaddish. Because if it's there in the courtyard, it becomes sanctified. If not, it does not become sanctified. Why? Midi havi kli sharis. It's similar to a service vessel, right? What is service vessel? I mean, we have a principle. If you have a kli sharis, you have a bowl that's from the base of Mikdash, and you by mistake go ahead and put like a strawberry into it, your own personal strawberry. Guess what happens to your strawberry? It becomes sanctified with all the ramifications. Bottom line is, in order for something to be sanctified, it has to be in the holy thing. So over here, we're talking about sanctifying bread. So maybe Rav Yochanan would say, listen, by chametz, bottom line is chametz is aser. So I don't care where your chametz is. If I'm slaughtering Karban Pesach and I have chametz anywhere, I'm going to be in violation. But when it comes to sanctifying the bread of the Karban Toda, there, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to create sanctity. So maybe it's specifically when it's in the walls of the Azara, similar to a utensil that holds holy things. If I'm trying to sanctify something, it would make sense it has to be in a holy place in order for it to be sanctified. It has no relationship to Karban Pesach, right? The two are and chametz. The two are one is about Isser, about, am I going to be in violation of the prohibition? But whereas when it comes to the sanctifying the bread, there the word al should mean it has to be right there, because what I'm trying to do is sanctify something, and maybe we see the whole Azara like one big bowl that I have to have the bread over there, and there Rav Yochanan would agree to Reish Lakish, and therefore I have to spell it out. Okay, and had we only taught it regarding the sanctification of the bread, the opposite, Havina would have thought. When it comes to sanctification of the bread, there Reish Lakish would hold that the word al means near. because if it's inside the courtyard, it could become sanctified, but if not, it will not become sanctified. But regarding chametz, he would agree with Rav Yochanan that we do not need, that the word al does not mean right next to it. Wherever the prohibition is, it is tricha. Therefore, we need to spell it out of both cases. So basically, what we're saying is as follows: the word al, which literally means over, is debated in two places between Rav Yochanan and Rish Lakish, and each one we have to spell them both out. By the Karban Toda, we have a machlokas between Rav Yochanan and Rish Lakish about does the bread have to be in the courtyard in order to become sanctified. Rish Lakish says it has to be in the courtyard, and Rav Yochanan says it does not. Right there, they argue about al. Okay, and then also by the chametz, they also argue about the word al. Rish Lakish holds that in order to be in violation of this prohibition of slaughtering a Karban Pesach with owning chametz, the chametz has to be with you in your back pocket in your hands. And Rav Yochanan says no, as long as you own it, doesn't matter where it is, you're going to be in violation. And as your point just pointed out, you need both those. If you just had one, you would not necessarily be able to infer the other because they each have different characteristics. Okay, says the Gemara further. Oshia asked the following question from Ami. Let's say the person slaughtering the Pesach does not have chametz. But one member of the group has chametz. Right? There's a slaughterer, and there's people going to eat it. So the slaughterer does not have chametz, but people in the group have chametz. What's the halacha? Amarle miksiv lo sishchat al chametzcha. Does the pasuk say you should not slaughter over your chametz? No, lo sishchat al chametz ksiv. It says don't slaughter when you have chametz. Right? It doesn't say you the slaughterer can't have chametz. It says when you slaughter there can't be chametz. Implication is that even if the members of the chabura, members of the group have chametz, there would also be a violation. Amar le'i hachi, if it just said in general, don't slaughter while there's chametz, then afilu echam v'sofa olam nami. Then it should also be anyone in the world. As long as anyone in the world owns chametz, you'd be in violation. That would be the simplest read of don't slaughter while there is chametz. The Gemara says no. Amar le'i, Rav Ami said like this. Amar krolo sishchat lo yalin. It says don't slaughter chametz and don't leave your Karban Pesach overnight. Okay, juxtapose the two together. Lo tishchad al chametz. Okay, don't slaughter over chametz. 63b3. Hanach dekaimi alei mishum lo yalin. For those who are subject to the prohibition of not leaving it overnight. In other words, like this: when a person slaughters the Karban Pesach, then the Karban Pesach now goes to who? To the people in the chabura and the people in the group. Okay, so if those people leave their meat over, we know there's a halach, you have to finish Karban Pesach. You can't leave it overnight. You're supposed to finish it all. It has to be completely finished. You're not supposed to leave anything over. But who could be in violation of that prohibition? Only the people who are in that chabura. In other words, if we're all in this chabura of not leaving, right? Someone else leaving over my Karban Pesach, like they're not relevant to it. So the point is that by juxtaposing the two, the Torah is telling us that it's only people in this particular chabura, in this group, who could be in violation of don't leave chametz, don't leave the meat of Karban Pesach over. Those people will also be in violation if they own chametz while the Karban Pesach is being slaughtered. But the fact that some guy, elsewhere owns chametz and has no relationship to this group, obviously there'll be no violation of this prohibition. Rav Papa makes an inference from there. He says, Hilga Kohen maktir sachelev. Let's say you have a Kohen who burns the chelev over chametz. Okay, remember, you slaughter the Karban Pesach, and then there's a couple of steps, but one of the things is the Kohen takes certain fats and whatever other stuff and burns it on the mizbeach. Now that Kohen, if he were to go ahead and not put it directly on the mizbeach and allow it to stay overnight, he'd be in violation of do not leave it overnight. So we just established that anyone who's in violation of leaving it overnight is also going to be in violation, the only people who can be in violation of don't own any chametz while it's being slaughtered. So we're saying now, therefore the Kohen who goes ahead and burns the chelev, if he were to own chametz over blosa, say, hov yesh machlal haladas emurin, he would also be in violation of this negative prohibition, since he's included the prohibition of leaving the sacrificial parts overnight. So the bottom line is what we've established is both the person who slaughters it, also the Kohen who is involved in the avoda, we'll see even more Kohanim in a second, and people in the chabura, if any of them own chametz, and it's while the Karban Pesach is being slaughtered, then they'd be in violation. We'll just have one brisa which supports this. Tani Vasir Papa, Hashokhes Pesach ala chametz. If one person slaughters the Pesach over chametz, over blosa, say you are in violation of this prohibition. Emasai, when is this so? Bisman shu lashochet or lazorek or le'echamei chabura. At a time when the chametz belongs to the person who slaughters it, or the person who throws the blood, or it's to one of the members of the group. Okay, hayla echav sofa olam. If a person at the end of the world has chametz in zakuglo has no relationship to this Karban Pesach, and therefore there's no violation. V'echad hashochet, v'echad hazorek, v'echad makter chayv. When we said the person slaughters, it really means every and person involved in any step of the process. Person who slaughters, person who sprinkles the blood, person who burns parts of the sacrificial, the Kohen who puts the stuff on the mizbeach. Avalamolik is a ofar ba'asar, a person who performs malika on a bird on the 14th of Nisan. We'll come back to that line later. Well, we'll start that line, God willing, tomorrow. Have a great day.